A good day to you all, and welcome back to the Africa Football Business Show for the final episode of this season. My name is Kumar Parmar. I'm the Principal Director at Parmars Sports, which is a sports law boutique based in London and in Madrid. But enough about me. We've got two wonderful guests here today on the show, and we're going to be discussing in essence, we're going to be discussing media rights. We're going to be covering the buying and selling of media rights, as well as why media rights may not have developed, or the practice of media rights may not have developed as much in Africa as it has in various other jurisdictions. So with us today, we have Richard Dimosi, who is the founder and manager of MBS, which is a sports rights company based and practicing primarily across Africa. And in addition to that, we have Paolo Macchi, Esquire, Senior Associate at Withersworlwide. We've actually got quite a strong Italian flavour to our episode today because Richard is based currently in Roma, in Italy, if I'm not mistaken, and Paolo is speaking to us from Milano. So welcome to you both to the show. Thank you for making your time to be here with us today and to share your expertise with us. Before we do proceed, it's only important for me to say a huge thank you to all of our collaborators, Sports Legal, and all of the other sponsors that we're working with on the show. So without any further ado, I just want to begin very briefly with what media rights actually is. There's a number of people, I'm sure, within the audience who's going to be asking what media rights are, how media rights works, and how it can be packaged as a commodity to be bought and sold. Now, if we look very recently at the European Super League debacle, one of the most pertinent things that was being spoken about was the ability for these teams to break away from their respective national leagues, to form this European Super League, as it was called, and to be able to increase monetization of their media and their broadcasting rights in a way that they wouldn't be able to do ordinarily. But if we break it right down to the bare bones, it's important for us to understand what that actually means. Now, Paolo, if I may begin with your good self, you've been practicing. Hi, Paolo. You've been practicing in IP and media rights for a long time, and your practice covers much of Europe and North America. When we talk about media rights, what does it actually mean? What do we mean when we talk about media rights, and how can this be something that has a value that we can attribute to it?
Well, media rights are basically intellectual property rights in relation to the moving images of an event, or a program, a show. In this case today, of course, we're talking about sports, so media rights in sports. What in general are intellectual property rights are, of course, are the rights given to a person or that is the creator for the creation of their minds. And usually they give the creator, which is the entity or the person that put in place the rights, the exclusive rights over the use of his or her creation for a certain period of time. And let's kind of differentiate a little bit between actually media rights, TV rights, and broadcasting rights, because sometimes the three terms they drive to a little bit of confusion. TV rights and broadcasting rights is basically the old name that is given to the right to broadcast something, usually an event, a program, or a sports match, sports game, through traditional television. Whereas these days we're talking about media rights because, of course, we have to acknowledge the fact that there is a much larger plethora of technologies that through which we can basically watch content, consume content. So we basically shift from traditional linear television to digital television, and thanks to that, and thanks to the internet, we are right today to all these sort of new platforms like over-the-top so-called OTT platform through which everybody on their cell phone or laptop can consume sports content. And basically, the way it works is that exclusivity is key to sports broadcasting rights, which means that whenever media rights are assigned or licensed from the original rights holder to a broadcaster, and then we can talk a little bit later about really how the assignment, the sale of rights takes place, directly by way of contract, of course, or through invitation to tender, so some sort of an auction. Basically, the way it works is that the key to give value to media rights is so-called exclusivity. The fact that I'm giving the media rights to an entity like a broadcaster, and I'm promising to that broadcaster that he will be the only entity, the only broadcaster allowed to transmit the broadcast that sport event in that specific territory. So exclusivity is very much linked to the geography, to a specific territory. And going back to your initial mentioning to the Super League, we assume that by creating new matches, new games, new sports events, broadcasting rights would benefit. But the reality is that it can be actually the opposite. Because there is an important principle to remember is that unlike ticketing, where you have more events means selling more tickets, when it comes to broadcasting rights, the more events you have, the more programs you have, the less valuable those programs become, because basically you have more than one broadcaster transmitting different events, and those events really they have less and less value. How the rights are basically sold. Usually, there is a so-called upstream market and a downstream market. So the upstream market would be the market between the original rights holders, which are leagues, federations, football clubs, and so on. And the downstream market would be the market through which broadcaster will sell content directly to consumers, to audience. In the middle, however, there are very often other entities like sports marketing agency, for example, or other broadcasters. And sometimes between the upstream market, so the initial market of the sale of the rights from league or federations to an entity, there would be a chain of title, and before the rights actually arrive to the consumer, are actually seen on television by the consumer, quite often there are multiple passages. So the rights are actually licensed from one entity to another entity to another entity. So there is a chain of licensing and sub-licensing of the rights. And quite often this is done either by broadcaster, but even more often by so-called sports marketing agency or some sort of intermediary that acquires the rights, creates packages, and then sell the rights for profit. And creation of packages is very important because basically what agency or broadcasters do, they take basically they feed the images from different sports events sometimes, or from the same sports or different disciplines within the same sports, and they create a program and then resell it to broadcasters.
Sure.
It's also
Paolo, actually, sorry, Paolo, to interject.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I think it was very very pertinent what you were talking about there in terms of the sports marketing agencies and of course their role within this entire spectrum. And I was just wondering, maybe Richard, without interjecting into Paolo's speech, because you've both got so much to say today. We've only got a short period of time. Richard, I'm quite aware that your role is in an agency that deals with sports rights, an agency that you founded yourself and you currently are the managing director of. How has your experience been when you're actually dealing with these rights? Of course, Paolo has given us a wonderful overview of what media rights are and how they can operate as commodities in the market. But when you are actually transacting these rights, what sort of issues or challenges do you come up against, particularly within the African sector?
Yeah, thank you very much for this nice presentation, Paolo. But when it comes to commercialize those properties, the main problem that you faced, more particularly in Africa, is the IP control first, because when you deal, you have the up market, when you deal with a federation or a title owner such as FIFA or UEFA or Premier League or La Liga, you get the right from them. So when you sign the contract with them, you have some obligations to look after the copyright use of their property. And when you acquire those rights, you have to duplicate those obligations to the broadcaster. So the challenge, having said that, is the African market is not used to the copyright use of those properties. So you have to deal with some educational workshop to educate the market and the broadcasters in so many levels that sometimes the language barrier can be a problem, because some of them do not understand the difference between media rights, what we call media rights, and advertising and sponsorship, because so-called media rights are sometimes interpreted as sponsorship and advertising. When in South Africa, media rights is sponsorship and advertising, but when you talk about media rights in Europe, it's about the essence of the rights. So there's so many confusion just being in African markets, which is broken down into different level. And the second problem that you have is to commercialize and create packages around the property. It depends on the type of competition that you have in hand and how the consumer has an appetite for this competition. Let's say, for instance, the Brazilian league is potentially an interesting league, but unknown in Africa. So you might enjoy 10 matches every weekend, but the market is not ready to afford the 10 matches. So you have to package such rights that you break down into pay TV properties or broadcasters and free-to-air broadcasters. Okay.
Absolutely. Well, as you said, it comes down to the quality of the content, and then the ability of the consumer to absorb that content.
Right.
So no, I think you've covered it well, and you also latched on to something that I was going to go on to immediately. So I'm quite happy that you've made a segue there, Richard. But you're talking about the differences in language. Now, first of all, you're speaking about the interpretation of media rights in South Africa or many different countries, which might actually oppose to the definition used in some European countries. But languages per se is also another challenge to overcome in Africa, isn't it? Because in the Western world, we look at Africa as loosely divided between the Anglophone and the Francophone countries. But that actually quite bluntly disrespects the myriad of tribal and indigenous languages that we've got across all of the 54 nations. So how do we deal with that as an issue? I mean, how do you, as a practitioner in the market, deal with that as a concern?
There's when you handle properties such as, I would take an example, for instance, English Premier League, which is the mainstream European championship in Africa. So-called championship provide a signal in English and in the international channel, where people can actually make their own translation and commentaries in local languages. But when it comes to media rights, as Paolo said, title owners organize tenders. Okay, and they put the product in the markets where agencies like mine and others can actually bid to acquire those rights. There's a segmentation of Anglophone markets for some properties, Francophone markets, and depending on one or the other, you could acquire some local languages, which 10 years ago were not significant. But now you can see that in that very intense and aggressive market, local language becomes a real problem. If I acquire Francophone content, I will acquire also local language. But if my vis-a-vis Anglophone-wise acquire the same rights and acquire also local language, we could face some problems in which, for instance, I will acquire local language and I will translate or comment the games in Zulu in South Africa, meaning that the right holder on the Anglophone part will be actually competing with me in his own market, because it's by nature is an Anglophone country, but I will be able to broadcast contents on an affiliate platform in local language, in Zulu or any. So there's actually a war that becomes more and more aggressive on local language across Africa.
So having said that, would you say, in your view, that we're quite far away from having a range of broadcasts in, for example, in Lingala or in Kiswahili or whatever it might be? Or do you think that there is still an appetite for this, that in the foreseeable future we will start to receive more of this kind of content to consume?
The future is in local language. With all due respect,
in Africa, of course, we're focusing
in Africa, yeah, of course. In all due respect, when you land in, let's say, Togo as a country, yes, the country speak French, but in the countryside or in the bush side, people speak local language. They speak Ewe, and the comments in Ewe are actually more attractive, more interesting, and they can capture the commentaries in local language. So when you have two agencies competing with each other, one in French, one in local language, there's a great advantage to local language. So at the same time that the market evolved to over-the-top television, OTT, mobile use, the appetite for such contents migrates also to local language.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you, Richard. And I think just moving on from there, because we've already got a flood of questions coming in, which is fantastic.
I just wanted to stress on a point
Go on,
that Richard started talking about, copyright and how the rights are sold through invitation to tenders. It's always very important to remind to our audience that in most jurisdictions worldwide, and at least in most jurisdictions here in Europe and in North America, actually copyright does not really attach to a sport event per se when the sport event is played. So when it comes to a football match, basically courts of law see a football match as a bunch of players kicking a ball. Even if there is a technique behind it, even if there is a strong exercise, a mental exercise from the players to understand the movements, basically football players are not treated equally as actors or singers or performers. So copyright does not really attach per se in the match, but it attaches only when the cameras actually enter in the stadiums, and that's why, and on the basis of the laws of specific jurisdictions, and they vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, of course, then copyright attached in a different way. Like here in Europe, for example, in most of the cases, there are specific laws that, although they recognize that copyright does not attach to the football match itself, then due to the fact that the match has so much value economically, then some sort of rights are attached when the cameras enter the stadium. And that's how leagues, federations, and clubs then they become the owner. Usually the organizer of the match becomes the owner and then has the right to sell the rights through invitation to tender. And then, of course, we may differentiate between individual seller rights and collective seller rights, which is a huge point also that we may address today.
Sorry to interrupt.
Go for it, please.
I just want to add something, like on the legal side. All the contracts that we receive from title owners for the destination of Africa are all non-exclusive. Just because the title owners such as FIFA, they have their own internet channel. So me as an agency, I'm just in the middle between the title owner and the broadcasters, meaning that all contracts that we sign with the broadcasters are non-exclusive. Just as an example, we are distributing the Euro in Nigeria with multiple broadcasters, and those rights are non-exclusive. And we are launching our YouTube channel tomorrow, and we're launching also our simulcast channel on the mobile OTT platforms. So this is what you just mentioned about the exclusivity side. Even though in the contract, because some of the markets in Africa are not familiar with tenders or competition. There's only a few countries like Ghana where you can actually release a tender, or now in East Africa, Uganda, Tanzania, where you can release a tender. But if there's 2 broadcasters in Senegal, you cannot sign non-exclusive with them, because they will not accept that. So even though if it's non-exclusive, the practice knows that we will never sell the rights to a second broadcaster. In such, we put in a contract that we will not approach a second broadcaster. There's only a few countries. And about the Super League, which is a good start, to stimulate the industry, the sport industry in Africa and the football industry in Africa, where players can actually stay in their club, where clubs can actually generate revenues from media and television, where, as you said, a player can have his own reputation in his own country. In such, he doesn't need to travel and go and play in Europe. He can stay in his country until he reaches maturity and then reach a club. I think that the Super League would be a good idea for the African market.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I'm sure you've come across, Richard, that the new CAF president has been in talks with the FIFA president, and I think it was at the inauguration of the new president where they announced that they were seeking to have an African Super League.
Yes.
With a certain buy-in, where I believe all of the clubs had to buy in with an amount of $20 million to become participants, if I'm not mistaken. And then it was very shortly after that we had the whole European Super League fallout. So there was quite a contrast in views. But no, it's an interesting point you make in that sense.
The European market with the African market, what might not work in one continent might work very well in another continent, especially from a media rights standpoint.
Yeah, and also to develop the football. And
of course, even more important. Yes, of course.
Because if you improve the quality of the product, then invariably the media rights are going to generate more value, which is something that can then be commoditized. But if we talking about value and commodity, you both mentioned the tender process, and Richard, you mentioned Pan Africa. It's not really a practice that's used or recognized as much. Whereas Paolo, you're working in a field or you're working in a jurisdiction where invitation to tender is quite standard. Now, one of the questions we've actually received from one of our regular viewers, Kyron Surrett, from the Caribbean. Kyron asks, does the cost analysis for the initial tender for media rights also include the cost of production and distribution of a feed? I mean, what would you be able to say to that, Paolo?
Yes, of course it includes that, because it's part of the whole creation of the signal. Whenever there is an initial tender offer, an invitation to tender, actually, so that broadcasters or agency will tender their offer to the league or the federation, the initial invitation to offer will include an understanding of the cost of production and the distribution of the feed. Because of course the television production of the event, even if it's legally it's a different copyright, it's a different right, is very much connected to distribution of the event. So whenever league or federation they come out with an invitation to tender, they usually have to address that. And they do that also because whenever a league or a federation issue the invitation to tender, they also expect broadcasters and agency to provide some sort of guarantee to the league or the federation. When I say guarantee, I mean both a financial guarantee, a bank guarantee, as well as technical guarantee. So the federation or the league, they expect that the broadcaster, when they place their when they tender their offer, they will provide some sort of paper from a bank or multiple banks in different parts of the world supporting financially their tender, their offer, as well as a bunch of technical guarantees, making sure, warranting the league or the federation that they have all the technical means to be able to broadcast the event. Because the last thing that we want, that the league, the rights holder wants, is that the event then is assigned to a broadcaster that then in the end is not able for some reason to broadcast it. And that happens, it can happen also in Europe, because we have seen during the past 3 seasons, DAZN, for example, acquired the rights, but there were a lot of concerns from Serie A, but there were a lot of concerns that due to the fact that in Italy, the internet is not as good as we think. There might be fallout, and there might be problems with watching the matches. So of course that's an analysis. The cost analysis of the production of the event is very, very much connected with the invitation to tender.
That's very interesting, to make the comparison between the two markets and, the source of the tender and how it is perceived in Africa. Because when Paolo mentioned, the bank guarantee and the financial guarantee and the technical also aspect guarantee in terms of quality. And by the way, when you sign a media rights with the title owner, you have to work with a specific supplier for the technical distribution. When you sign from the source, whether with FIFA, they have their own arrangement with the technical company, basically. So the problem that we face when it comes to Africa is that those suppliers are not sometimes fit to broadcast in Africa. Just because, Italy is one country where, the bandwidth can be unstable sometimes or not the same level than other countries like the US or even Northern Europe, but imagine in Africa. When it comes to Niger or Gabon, we well know that those channels and those countries cannot receive IP, Internet Protocol distribution.
Yeah.
When you compare IP distribution and satellite distribution, you can increase the price by 7x7. So in the essence, when broadcasters or agencies like mine have to bid for rights, the cost of distribution, the cost of production increase massively as opposed to a European country.
And that's why sometimes it's better to buy the rights non-exclusively, because they're probably less expensive than purchasing them exclusively. At least for an agency.
Correct. So when you pick up signal from Latin America, you have to organize a turnaround in Europe and then distribute across Africa. So you can multiply times 7 the cost of production. So which makes the tender unfair for an African perspective. Reason why there's no many major or many African agencies or aggregator of content like Canal Plus is or Supersport is. So because that's, when a company acquire rights for Euro or FIFA, you can take a third of that cost just for technical purposes. And then when it comes to bank guarantee as well, and I guess MediaPro will agree with me, the bank guarantee now is something that you can't avoid because of, the current markets, the situations, the MediaPro, League One and stuff. So, and when it comes to Africa, there's also that mindset that, because of the past experiences with African partners where title owners in Europe require tense and tight bank guarantees from African players. Just because, if you take the example of Econet Media, Kwese, who was liquidated, and even before other companies, title owners are very sensitive to African markets, so they require a tight bank guarantee. But the bank guarantee has a cost, okay, which is roughly 3 or 4% of the value of anything that you proposed. But when it comes to Africa, no bank in Africa is rated AA, meaning that the bank guarantee cannot be received, from FIFA or UEFA. So any African players needs to get a bank guarantee from a correspondent bank, which gets a bank guarantee and provide the bank guarantee to FIFA or UEFA or any other European. And when you multiply times 3,
one of the reasons for there not being too many players in the African market at the moment is, as you said, the education and the understanding of how all of these things actually work. So if we're talking about the valuation increasing 3, 4, or 7-fold of the product, and then pitching for that product and then trying to close a transaction, I mean, what's your day-to-day in this industry? How does it work?
First of all, you need experience in that, because no one...
It's the chicken and egg, isn't it? You need experience, but you can't get experience.
Exactly. You need experience, meaning that you need to be in the market for some while, because... and I will not mention any title owner now, but if you take just one European competition, no one can, or few people, can confirm what is the value of that property now in the market in Africa. Even the title owner has no idea of the value of his property in Kenya. No. Why? The reason why is that, federation, upmarkets, give rights to media agencies. Media agencies work with media agencies, agents, independent marketers, and then finally broadcasters. Meaning that you give the key of your car to someone else to drive, who drive it as a taxi, but take another taxi and take another taxi. So basically, it's Serie A has no idea of the value of his property in Africa because someone else distributes.
Of course.
Someone else is in touch with the markets. And then after the second cycle, another agency get it. And there's no transition between the first agency and the second one. So from those rights that I seen sometime for a value of 500,000 6 years before, no, the broadcaster can get them at 100,000. Why? Because it changed from one agency to another. Yeah. So there's no transition. But when the title owner keep track of its rights and control from the source, meaning contract with the broadcaster itself,
it has to be spelled out in the invitation to tender, of course.
Correct. Yeah.
Since the very beginning.
Yeah.
No, so effectively it's the tracking and the diligence, isn't it? Where we don't have a body of work in the background to be able to demonstrate how the value has progressed or how the value has increased. But would you also not say, Richard, that by the same token, using the same example that you mentioned, valuation of rights which may have been 500K a few years ago could be 100K now? You could also have the contrast situation where something that was valued 100K a few years ago could now be valued at 500K, because it just depends on whatever the seller of the rights at the time feels, really, because they don't have enough diligence and analysis to actually back it up one way or another. Or would you say that that's not correct?
No, that's correct. I think that the missing part here is market intelligence. The title owner should have market intelligence departments that actually consider the new players. East Africa, back in the days, 5 years ago, there's a major player on digital that stepped in like 2 years ago. So now East Africa is ready for regional tenders where the rights were 100,000 5 years ago. Now you can get like 600 just because you understand the market and you understand who are the new players. And then there's the upcoming players as well to come. So this is how you can keeping track of your own property, understanding the markets, and then packaging the right formats. You know what I mean? So if you take the CAF, for instance, there's the African Cup of Nations, the Champions League, there's youth. So how do you package that based on the appetites in the market? Okay. So altogether, I think that this is how, title owners can increase the value of their properties in Africa or put it at the right price.
And of course, in most jurisdictions, we saw the value of the rights going up and up and up in the past 20 years, at least when it comes to football here in Europe with the 5 major leagues. But my understanding or the feeling that most experts in this field has these days is that we basically reached the ceiling, is that the value of the rights is not going to go up anymore. I'm not saying that the rights are necessarily going down and the value of the rights is necessarily going down, but of course, we are right to a point when the value of the rights is not going to continue to rise as it has done in the past 15, 20 years.
Would you say, Paolo, in relation to that, and again, you've very briefly fleeted over this point when you were talking about the amount of content there is to consume these days, and the converse proposition that the more you get out there, the less valuation there actually is for each of these properties.
Exactly.
So would you say that that's partially down to the fact that you feel that we've reached a plateau in the costs, or do you think there's actually something else behind it?
Well, in general, it's because, yes, there is so much content these days available to everyone that the value of rights, traditional broadcasting rights in sports, everything is not really going up and up as we have seen in the past 15, 20 years. Also notice that in the past 15, 20 years, that's the historical period of the transition between linear television, analogical television, to digital television, to the internet. So the arrival of the internet, at least at the very beginning, that's what created a situation, a favorable situation in which the rights kept increasing. Now we even have too much, and we are at the opposite situations in which the model of buying rights and then assigning to another agency and then reassigning to another agency and sub-license, like Richard was saying, is not working anymore. So, and in general, many are seeing, sports marketing agencies, of course, suffering a lot from in this situation.
Okay, and if we talk about, you mentioned, Paolo, that some sports marketing agencies are suffering, and I'm going to bat it back to you, Richard. As soon as he said that point, we've actually got a very nice question from one of our good friends on the show, Dr. Jared Akinders, who Richard, of course, you know very well also, and he's put forward a couple of questions, but I'm just going to start with the second question. How do you properly value the property in Africa? What type of data do you use? I mean, Paolo said that there's a lot of struggles and challenges that the management companies are facing. So what would you do to properly value the commodity that you have, or the commodity you want to get access to?
First, you can value a property. And to value a property, you need to get intel for the last. What I do personally is that I evaluate the value of each property for the last 9 years, 3 cycles, to understand also the variation between one season to another, and with the factors considering into the fact that an agency was handling which year, which cycle, which agency. And I also evaluate the sub-licensing and media sales, so sponsorship and advertising department for each agency which was handling the property. I mean, for instance, for La Liga, I look at the past years of La Liga distribution across Africa, the type of agency distributing the property. Last cycle was distributed by SuperSport. SuperSport being a pay TV Anglophone agency in Africa.
Sure.
But the rights were sold for a Pan-African level, Anglophone and Francophone, pay TV and free-to-air. Distribution free-to-air for the last cycle of La Liga was number of 6 territories, only for free-to-air. Of course, the agency distributing that property was a pay TV Anglophone one. Commercially, that agency had the strategy to block the rights in order not to make the rights available for free-to-air networks, so people can actually take their pay TV platform. So that explained that the value was affected not because La Liga was not an interesting competition, but because the title owner, for commercial reason, went into negotiation and contracting with the pay TV Anglophone platform. So I had to look back to the 6 past years to find out who was the agency who had the ability to distribute on the pay TV and free-to-air level to put the market price at the right level. So today I have the value for each property, the main 5 European competition across Africa for the last 9 years. And this is how I navigate. So now, moving forward, I take into consideration, as I said, the market intel of who are the new players, what influence are there on the markets. And one thing that is also really important to understand, if I deal with a free-to-air network or a pay TV network, what is, for the pay TV network, what is the media sales market potential, advertising and sponsorship, and on the free-to-air, what is the channel budget dedicated for sports?
Oh, excellent. But then ultimately, I think you've put it in a very eloquent way. But ultimately, it boils right back down to the market intel that you've been building up for a single, for a singular period of time. which is your 9 years, as you said, your 3 cycles. If we move on from there and going on to another question, Richard, we've got a bunch of questions today, which I'm really delighted about, and we've got a lot of regular viewers here. We've got Pablo Metroz from Chile, we've got Timothy Kaja from Uganda. So we can see that at the Africa Football Business Show, we've got people watching from Africa, from Europe, from South America, from the Caribbean. It's great to have you all with us today. And Pablo's asked a question with regards to the commercialization of football media rights in Africa. What would be the proper approach? You've spoken about the ability to develop, to curate, and to utilize your market intelligence, Richard. But what would be the best approach, considering the actual state of football media rights in Africa, which is at a more nascent stage than it is in other jurisdictions, to then commercialize that and generate business for people such as yourselves in the intermediary aspect of it, or also for others that are trying to become players in the market?
The African market is like the European market 20 years ago in the 80s. To be able to commercialize a property, you need to understand the markets. Simple as that. You break down your offering to broadcasters, as Paolo said at the beginning. So there's regular broadcasters, linear broadcasters, and there's OTT, mobile, super app, platform type.
Sure.
And then you consider also another type of broadcaster on the linear side is radio as well, which is really
which we're just going to go on to actually, but yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, we always forget about the radio broadcasting rights, which are more exposed to IPUs, by the way, because it's easy to pirate an audio signal, so, but we can talk so much about how we can struggle as well, the copyright use and piracy and etc. But the third segment that I believe in is marketing. A broadcaster who invests in property needs to recoup his investment. As simple as that. So he will sell advertising sponsorship himself in the markets. There's no measurement tools in the markets. So in some countries, you can, for 30-second rotation slot for advertising, you can get $15 for some countries, regardless of the number of viewers. In another country, it's completely different. When you have those measurement audience measurement companies, they spend a lot of money. It's very costly to actually get the measurement tools across Africa. So you have no visibility. But what I would suggest for any agency who wants to compete with mine is, first of all,
don't try because I'm too big. Is that the first thing?
Yeah. First, you need to understand the market now. You target linear as digital and mobile. You develop marketing. At the end of the day, our agencies are called sport marketing agencies. Sport, yes. Agencies, yes. But marketing. Do you see Euro big or FIFA big across Africa? Sports is popular. It's a party. Most of all in Africa. When you take the 2014 World Cup in Brazil, it was partying. All the jerseys, Brazilian jerseys, sexy. Everybody was partying. Where else, there's than in Africa, you can celebrate sports and football. But
of course,
there's equal revenues on marketing. Okay, and marketing is, if you are a sponsor of any broadcaster in Nigeria like NTA, which cover 140 million people, you have visibility, a huge visibility, to actually develop marketing activities such as public viewing, contest game, activations, clinics. And now you tackle another area of sport, which is social development, clinics, etc., etc., etc. So now into that you bring the Super League. So but not going far from the original question, the best way to commercialize a property is to consider these three aspects: broadcasting, media sales, sponsorship, advertising, which work together, and marketing. Because a brand will sponsor, advertise, on linear, mobile, digital, but also be part of the public viewing. You have full stadium with people drinking, having fun, partying. Then you bring some street marketing into that. It is the same sponsor. So where you used to gain 1 million for sponsorship advertising, you can have an extension to 1 million because of marketing and engagement with the market.
This also takes me, Richard, to the point of how important is also to maintain the quality of stadiums. This is a topic that is of utmost importance here in Italy, for example. The value of broadcasting rights in Italy is not as high as La Liga rights or Premier League rights. And one of the reasons is, of course, because the quality of the stadiums here in Italy, for example, is not as good as in the UK. Yeah. And the quality of the stadiums has a huge impact on the sponsor, on advertisement, but even more importantly, on the quality of the signal, the broadcasting signal, because there is not, it takes away from the creation of a common package that can be marketed, put on the market as other leagues like Premier League in premise to do.
Yeah. No, that's true, but it's all, and, I'm the right place to say so because I am African myself from Congo and I grew up in Europe, but there's an educational part that shouldn't be ignored in that. African market has a huge potential, but it would not change overnight. There's an educational, and when you stimulate the industry, basically, there's a 40 or 50 body of work around football, people for ticketing, cameramen, sound engineer, producers, directors, coach, etc., etc., etc. So the quality of stadium, the quality of the signal, that fits also, when you mentioned earlier about the digitalization, the DTT, 10 French DTT. Some of the countries in Africa, they're just beginning the transition into DTT or digitalization. So it will take some time, but we should start somewhere. And the quality of football and games, as you mentioned also, Dave, at the beginning, will be generated by the media rights. But what I say media rights is attention. The Senegalese football championship broadcast in Ivory Coast. The Super League has something very interesting for Africa is that, when I mention local language, people in the suburb, they want to watch a football game in Ewe in Togo, not in French. Or if they have for the opposite choice, they will choose Ewe. But now, if there's English Premier League on free-to-air, which is one game per weekend, and not the top game, you don't have the classicals, and then there's my team in Senegal playing against one team in Congo, they will watch that. Not two teams, but one team. It's like the French league. Basically, there's Paris Saint-Germain and maybe Lyon and Marseille. But, if you choose one league from Nigeria...
And Lille. We can't forget the current champions, surely.
Yes, or Lille. But, if you take like, the Tepe Mazembe from Congo playing against one team in Senegal, people would watch that. I want to watch my team competing with Senegal. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's great. And if we can pivot, we've spoken about different types of content, and again, Richard, you mentioned the education, which is something that's very important to me with regards to the football sector as a whole in Africa. However, something you spoke about earlier latches on to a couple of comments from Timothy Kaja that we've got here watching with us today as well. You said that the African market for media is 20 years behind Europe. And I think it's only pertinent when we talk about a previous time, let's say, that we don't neglect something that you did raise, which is radio. So from the perspective of radio, and maybe Paolo, we can start off with your good self as well, because it's often seen that the pertinence of radio is diminished in Europe somewhat. But what would you say in terms of the valuation of these properties? Are they abandoned, or are they still...
They're still part of the country because they exist. So as a lawyer, of course, I will put in radio rights as part of any licensing agreement selling media rights in general. But the reality is that, with this new technology, everything goes through the internet, everything goes on cell phones or tablets. nobody really cares as much as radio rights as they used in the past. However, Richard pointed out something very extremely important, is that radio rights can be still valuable for pirates, because it's easy to pick up the signal of a radio signal and then transmitting, unlawfully to others. So there's the answer to this question is that, of course, they still exist, they have not been fully abandoned, but they haven't most been fully abandoned, to be honest.
Yeah.
And Richard, would you add to that as well, or would you say that things are slightly different in Africa from a radio perspective?
Yeah, no, it's pretty much abundant, but we are reactivating that personally. Radio for me, it's another platform of communication for promotion, because when it comes to market intel, you reach the youth from 15 to 25. They're watching radio. This is where you can place your marketing. When it comes to radio commentaries, simulcasts of what goes on the air, you're subject to piracy, basically. So it's just a leverage where you can actually do all your marketing, and it's like you have to be there, but you're very much exposed to piracy. So it's one step behind, but it's necessary to have it.
No, brilliant. I think with radio, I always find that very interesting, because with the amount of content that we've got these days online, on the mobile, and on TV and so on and so forth, you still can't beat the sound from a radio station, especially when you are driving or you're commuting from one place to another. It's often impractical to be sitting there watching a match on your smartphone, particularly if you're going to be breaching some highway code or some sort. So I think there is still definitely a need for radio, and Timothy made quite a valid point as well with regards to the title holders seemingly abandoning the radio stations. So it'll be great to see them rise like Phoenix in the near future. But we've discussed quite a lot of things with regards to this subject, and again, I think it would be far better if we had several hours or several shows. Maybe Brian, the CEO and the founder of this idea, could think about putting another media rights episode on. But Paolo, if we can just go to you very briefly, are you able to, in a nutshell, try and compare and contrast some of the approaches that we see in Europe or North America? And maybe Richard can piggyback on this as well, to highlight some of the real differences in approach that we have in media rights practice. Because I know that when we were talking off camera, Paolo, you're referring to antitrust and some of the EU laws. Yeah. How do things work in Europe, which are fundamentally different to what we have in Africa?
We actually pretty much touched it at the very beginning. I mean, the differentiation between the individual seller rights versus the so-called joint seller rights, first of all. I mean, in the past year in Europe, at least when it comes to football, all rights used to be sold individually, which means that the single clubs, as the copyright holder, used to sell their rights directly to broadcasters. And these individual seller rights was something that was the trend basically all the way up to the early years of 2000, but proved to be very bad financially for the smaller club. Only the big clubs and the big leagues were benefit from it. So that starting from the early 2000s and following the trend that the Premier League started in 2006, then we have the so-called centralized or joint seller rights. It means that the rights are assigned by each club to the league to which they belong, and then the league sell the rights in a huge package to broadcasters through the invitation to tender that we just talked about. The reason why we have these collective seller rights or joint seller rights, or sometimes you hear the term centralized seller rights, is because when the rights are sold by the league to the broadcasters, then of course the league will have to redistribute back the income stemming from such sale to each and single club belonging to the league. And the distribution of the income, usually, at least here in the European Union, is done by way of certain percentages that has been set by law. For example, here in Italy, we have a specific law that also in Spain is been enacted in 2005, in Italy, sorry, in 2015 in Spain, in 2008 in Italy. Bundesliga, La Liga, they all follow this model through which the rights are sold by the league, and then at least 50% of the income stemming from the right is redistributed back to the club on an equal basis. So this percentage is extremely important, at least the threshold of 50%, because it maintains some sort of fairness between each club of the league that is selling the rights. So making sure that not only the big clubs within the league are benefiting financially, but also the smaller clubs. And of course, whenever the rights are sold through this centralized sale of rights, then in every jurisdiction, not only in Europe, but also in North America, as well as Africa, of course, the antitrust regulator will analyze how the rights are sold to the broadcaster, because what they want to make sure is to avoid the creation of a monopoly. So the purpose of antitrust regulators and the reason why they analyze so much the sale of rights prior to the sale to a broadcaster is because they want to avoid one single broadcaster, especially pay TV, from acquire all the rights in a huge package. And not only the entity acquiring the rights, like a pay TV, is the object of analysis from an antitrust standpoint, but also the duration of the package. Because, of course, if the rights are sold for 3 seasons, 4 seasons, 6 seasons to a broadcaster, we tend to arrive to a situation in which the broadcaster acquiring the rights will have a dominant position over other broadcaster, and that, of course, is no good from a competitive standpoint. So in many jurisdictions, in Europe, for example, there are these regulations, especially the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, Articles 101 and 102, which basically make sure that when the rights are sold, they are sold in a transparent way by way of invitation to tender that avoids the creation of a monopoly in favor of one broadcaster. So a very, very important topic that is also became very, very important more recently in Africa as well, because as far as I'm aware, for example, during the past, starting from 2009, many of the rights belonging to CAF were sold to a sports marketing agency called Lagardère, which is now Sport 5. Then the contract back in 2016 or so was renewed all the way to 2026 with an option to renew all the way to 2032 or something like that. You know, those kind of sale packages that are so long in time, of course, they had to be analyzed from an antitrust standpoint, because, of course, they tend to grant rights only to one broadcaster and basically clog the market.
Oh, thank you very much for that overview, Paolo. And I think if we now use that same perspective, and if we take it in a different angle, Richard, maybe you'll be able to assist with this particularly because of your ability to speak from experience from both jurisdictions. Latching onto some of the things that Paolo's spoken of and the way it works in Europe, often when we come across discussions about African football and the development of African football, there seems to be this, with the greatest respect, this almost naive inclination to say we need to do things like Europe. But that's not necessarily always the case. I mean, it's a question that Pablo Metroth has also asked. What comparative advantages would you see in the African market right now? And certainly some things that maybe could be advantageous if adopted in European circuits as well. What would you see is quite positive about what we're already doing in Africa?
In Africa, you know, the advantage for, and you know, it's I would put that in a way where I will not be sarcastic, but the advantage in Africa is that you don't have to follow the antitrust law that that we just discussed about.
Sure.
And this is, you need to understand that I have joined the sports rights 5 years ago only, okay, and I came into that industry via the enforcement and piracy control, basically. I was on entertainment before, so I can make a comparison as a whole across Africa. My view is that in Africa, there's a huge opportunity right now to basically compete with the three main players in the markets. Paolo mentioned Lagardère, Sport 5. We can discuss about others in France, TVMS, Dentsu, etc., etc. In Africa, you have only three players, major players. One is Anglophone South African pay TV, as Paolo mentioned, is mainly on pay TV. And then you have the equivalents on the Francophone side, which is Canal Plus. And then there's a third player as well, which is StarTime, who is from Asia. Okay. Outside those three major players, you find some small agencies like mine and others who are also trying to find their space in the market. 2 years ago, you could not avoid this monopoly, okay, exercised by at least Supersport from South Africa and Canal Plus on the Francophone side. Recently, I think 4 months ago, one of those companies acquired shares on the other company. So I mentioned earlier La Liga business case on the free-to-air level. Free-to-air is basically you create value on free-to-air, eyeballs, mass market. Okay, if you want your property to be visible, you put it on free-to-air. Okay, and then you collect the value on pay TV subscription. People pay. It's like a lucrative business. But when the pay TV platform buy FTA rights, basically, you have no chance to exist. People have no chance to watch. Business has no chance. Championships have no chance to deploy corporate marketing. I think that everybody saw lately on the English Premier League, on Arsenal team visit Rwanda. Okay.
Yeah.
So
and Paris Saint-Germain as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Paris Saint-Germain as well. Rwanda is doing actually well. It's a good example because they invest in infrastructure, digitalization. They are also partnering directly with the clubs. It's corporate marketing. Okay. So visit Rwanda. What about Visit France in Ivory Coast? When will be the time where actually the championship of Ivory Coast will be so exposed in Ivory Coast that, I don't know, the city of Paris will promote himself or France will promote himself in Ivory Coast, invest in France or visit France and stuff. The money goes to Europe because in Africa, we're consuming European Championship. Broadcasters, sponsors, for some who are not located in Africa, the currency is going outside. So the money leaves and never comes back. It's not used on ground. So the industry is not developing. We're consuming, but we're paying outside. You want to watch the African Cup of Nations? Well, you have to pay Canal Plus. Money goes to France, and then you watch the competition that takes place in your own continent. So if you ask me now, what is the opportunity? The opportunity now is to be an African player, stimulate the industry, change, and compete. Sure. I mentioned local language is one. You take some space. You know what I mean? Francophone, it's fine, goes there, okay, but you take the space. I haven't seen for the last 5 years any applicable law about antitrust in Africa. When you consider you have to fight against one dinosaur to another who actually have shares on the other company. So where is your space? Okay. So, but the time is changing now. Okay. The market is changing. People understand that local language is more interesting. People understand that radio, it's cool and funky. People understand that marketing is actually what is happening here. When I buy your package of your company located in Europe, the Forex goes to Europe. But when I organize live events in my country, I spend the money here, sponsor, invest here, and then we use the money here to stimulate the industry.
Yeah.
Makes sense, yeah.
And stimulate the overall economy, as you were saying. I think just it's one of the things that you were talking about, local language, and it's just an image that's always conjured up in my mind when we do refer to this. I'm sure you'll be aware, Richard, because you're sitting in Roma at the moment, but the football club Roma has completely embraced, as maybe you've seen on particularly on social media, has embraced local languages in Africa and in Asia by having a Kiswahili Twitter feed, by having an Igbo Twitter feed, and various others. So it's interesting how the ability for European entities, as you were saying, is there to start embracing this market, but it still feeds the same issue, doesn't it? Where the Forex is still going into Europe, the product that is being consumed is still a European product, albeit one that's being catered to different persons. So how would you say, and I think I'm being informed that we're going to have to wind up soon enough. So I'm gonna invite both yourselves, Richard and Paolo, to put forward some views. But let's try and end on a nice positive note. What would your hopes be with regards to the development of media right consumption and media right practice in Africa? And Richard, if we could start with your good self, and then maybe Paolo, we can go on to you and see what your views might be with regards to the progression of that market.
I would be very happy to start seeing African championships on TV in Africa and in other countries of Africa and outside Africa. That would be a very good indicator that now the continent becomes more healthy with its own product. And then when I will see, a future ex-player, in activity, going to Africa to finish their career, that would
Excellent.
be actually, yeah.
Yeah, totally agree with you.
Well, interestingly enough, just during this show, we've actually had a player of Congolese descent who's currently playing in England in League One, who has just messaged saying that he would love to come on the show in the future, and maybe him and his generation would be the first generation that would be coming over to end their careers in Africa, and then maybe later on down the line, not only end their careers, but to practice the main part of their careers in African football. So let's keep our fingers crossed. Paolo.
Yeah. I totally agree with what Richard just said, and of course, I will continue to invest in new technology, on OTT, on making sure that the quality of programs continue to be high and are available to everyone all over the continent in Africa and beyond. And maybe I'm talking too much like a lawyer, but I will continue to focus on making sure that the sale of rights is carried out with transparent invitation to tenders, open to everyone, and that antitrust also topic, issues are enforced, antitrust regulation are enforced, because only when the rights are sold on multiple packages on different platforms and to multiple operators, that's how you maintain a competing market. If Africa continues to sell the rights for 10-15 years to only one big entity, then the market will continue to be stuck and be clogged as in the past, and there would be no freedom of movement and a competitive market as there should be.
Well, thank you. So again, we're referring to principles of governance. We want fairness, we want openness, we want transparency.
Absolutely.
We want the ability for people to be responsible, but also held accountable for that responsibility. And all of these things come with the development and the activation of the sector, the cultivation of this sector, which I think, Richard, you were referring to as well. So I think if we've got some takeaways that we can leave this wonderful session with, and maybe Richard and Paolo, you would like to add or to even to disagree with me. The first thing is ultimately we need to continue the education, and we're very grateful to the Africa Football Business Show, to Brian Vesala, the CEO and founder of the Football Foundation for Africa, for putting on this program, for this series, for helping to educate the sector with regards to African football and everything around it. But this is just one small piece of the education within the sector. We need to keep educating ourselves on the market and how it works. And then, of course, we need to start practicing our diligence. Richard, you focused on market intelligence quite a lot. And I'm still sure that there's a lot of people out there saying, but what is this market intelligence? How are we going to get hold of it? So I think we need to try and expose ourselves into the sector as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Market intelligence is that whoever is watching that program in Africa, just call me, because you are marketing intelligence. I need to know what radio people watch. I need to know what you're watching. I want to know what you're drinking and what where you're going there when you're in the country. This is market intelligence as well, to understand the market.
Fantastic. Now, thank you very much, Richard. And Paolo, would you have any final words from Milano?
No, really. I mean, I think I added enough from a legal standpoint. I just want to add, of course, if the audience listen to us, want to have more information about media rights, at least from a European or Italian standpoint, I'm very happy to follow up on this and be in touch through social media or emails or other means.
No, thank you very much. Well, I was just about to go on to that in our absolute concluding remarks. Both Richard and Paolo, thank you very much for your attendance and your time and for sharing your knowledge and expertise today. And we mean that with all sincerity. It's something that it's important to highlight, that you're not being paid for this service. My good friend Sean Cottrell at Law in Sport says this on all of his conferences, so I think I have to adopt it as well. You're not being paid for this. You are giving up your time freely, so we're really thankful that you're here. And you've also very kindly highlighted, Richard, you said, give me a call. Paolo, you said, get in touch on social media. Are you able to share your social media platforms?
Yeah, absolutely.
Paolo, I think you're on LinkedIn quite a lot, aren't you?
Yeah, of course.
And Richard, if you're...
Yeah, I mean, if they look for my name, they can find me, and I would be more than happy to connect with people interested in media rights and football.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Me too.
Thank you very much.
On LinkedIn, Richard Dimosi.
Thank you very much to Richard Dimosi and Paolo Macchi. I think just a final word from myself, if I may. A big thank you again to the panelists today. A big thank you to our audience from around the world, from South America, from the Caribbean, from Asia, from the Middle East, from Europe, and of course from Africa. I've been Dev Kumar Parmar. I'm just a mere lawyer, so I'm not important. These two gentlemen that you can see on either side of me are the stars of the show today. We just want to thank our sponsors and our collaborators, Sports Legal, who have been a wonderful collaborator for the Football Foundation for Africa, OTB, another long-running sponsor for the Football Foundation for Africa, See Beyond Leadership, another valued sponsor for the Football Foundation for Africa, and my own company, but I'm not going to plug myself too much. Thank you all for your time today, and we're looking forward to seeing you at the start of the new series, which is going to be beginning July 2021. Have a great evening, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Good evening.
Ciao.
Ciao.